The day I walked into that courtroom in my grandmother's old blazer and a manila folder I'd been building for 8 months, my brother laughed. Actually laughed, not under his breath, not a smirk he tried to hide. A real laugh, loud enough that the couple sitting 2 rows behind him turned to look. My mother put her hand on his arm, but she was smiling too. Their attorney, some guy in a charcoal suit with a watch that probably cost more than my car, didn't even glance up from his notes. I was 31 years old and I looked like I was there to apply for a job I wasn't going to get. That was fine. That was exactly what I needed them to think. I should back up because none of this started in that courtroom. It started the summer I was 9 years old, sitting on my grandmother's back porch in Asheville, North Carolina, shelling butter beans while she told me about the land her father had left her. 42 acres out past the county line. A pond. A barn that listed slightly to the left. She said she'd always meant to do something with it, but life had gotten in the way life does, and now she was just glad it was still hers. Who's going to get it? I asked her. I wasn't being greedy. I was 9. I was just curious the way 9-year-olds are curious about everything. She looked at me for a long moment. The person who understands what it means, she said. I didn't know what that meant. I shelled beans and let it go. My grandmother's name was Lorraine, and she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I belonged in it. I am the youngest of 3. My brother Nathan is 6 years older than me. My sister Patrice is 4 years older. And from the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, I understood that I was the one who didn't quite fit. Nathan was my father's favorite. They shared the same posture, the same way of walking into a room like they owned it, the same laugh. Patrice was my mother's shadow, always nearby, always agreeing, always being taken shopping or to lunch or to whatever my mother decided mattered that week. And I was the one who sat in the back seat on long drives and read library books and asked questions nobody wanted to answer. My grandmother saw that. She never said it out loud, but she saw it. When I was 12, she started teaching me to keep records. Not in a formal way. She never sat me down at a desk with a lesson plan. She'd just hand me a receipt and say, "Put that somewhere you'd be able to find it." Or she'd show me her little notebook where she wrote down every payment she'd made on her property taxes going back 20 years. People will forget, she told me once. You don't get to forget. I kept everything she gave me. I still do. My grandmother got sick when I was 26. Lung cancer, which surprised everyone because she'd never smoked a day in her life, and then it surprised no one because those are the kinds of things that happen. She went from diagnosis to hospice in 14 months. That year was the year I understood what my family actually was. Nathan drove down from Columbus twice. Twice in 14 months. He always had a reason. Work, the kids' schedules, the drive being brutal in winter. My mother went every other week but spent most of the visits rearranging things in my grandmother's house and talking about what would need to be handled afterward. My grandmother would look at me across the room during those conversations, and I would look back at her, and neither of us said anything. I went every weekend I could afford the gas. I slept on the couch in her living room and made her soft scrambled eggs in the morning because she told me once those were the only things she could taste anymore. We watched old game shows. She told me stories about growing up in the mountains, about my grandfather who died before I was born, about a life that was full and hard and nothing like what I was living. 3 weeks before she died, she told me she'd updated her will. I was sitting sad because I want you to hear it from me and not from a piece of paper. She'd left the house in Asheville to Nathan and Patrice jointly. She said she knew they'd probably sell it and she'd made peace with that. The savings account split 3 ways equally. But the land, the 42 acres, the pond, the barn that listed to the left, that was mine. All of it. And she'd put it in a trust managed by her attorney, a man named Gerald Hofstadter who had an office downtown and had handled her legal affairs for 15 years. Why me? I asked. Not because I was ungrateful, because I wanted to understand. Because you know what to do with it, she said. And because you already know what it means. I thought about that porch, the butter beans, the way she'd answered me when I was 9. I held her hand and I didn't say anything else. And 2 weeks later, I drove down again. And 3 days after that, she was gone. The will was read in Gerald Hofstadter's office on a Thursday afternoon in March. It was cold in a way that March in North Carolina sometimes is, wet and grey and mean. Nathan sat to my left and kept checking his phone. Patrice sat next to my mother, who had dressed like she was going to church. When Gerald read the part about the land, the room went quiet. Then my mother said, "I'm sorry, can you read that again?" He read it again. Nathan set his phone face down on the table. The land had been assessed the previous year at approximately $340,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was real money for our family anyway. And it was all going to me, held in trust until the estate cleared probate, managed by Gerald's office in the interim. That doesn't make sense, Patrice said. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to Nathan. She was sick, my mother said quietly. Toward the end, you know how she was. She wasn't always. She was sharp until the last week, I said. You would know that if you'd been there. Nobody said anything after that. We all drove home separately. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they'd be angry for a while and then they'd move on, the way families move on from these things, because what else can you do? I was wrong. 6 weeks later, I got a letter. Not from Nathan, not from my mother, from a law firm in Columbus, Ohio. 3 pages, dense with language I had to read slowly, then read again. The summary: my brother, with my mother and sister as co-petitioners, was filing for a conservatorship over the trust. Their argument was that I was financially irresponsible and therefore unable to manage a significant asset in my own interest. They were asking the court to appoint Nathan as conservator, meaning he would control the land, make decisions about it, and I would have no authority over any of it. Financially irresponsible. I sat with that for a long time. I was carrying $23,000 in student loan debt, which I had been paying down steadily for 4 years. I had one credit card with a $2,000 balance. I had never missed a rent payment. I had never been late on a utility bill. I had a checking account and a savings account and a Roth IRA I'd opened at 24 because my grandmother had told me to start one as soon as I could. But I'd also in my late 20s gone through a rough 18 months. A job loss, a move, a period where I'd leaned on that credit card more than I should have. There was a civil judgment from a landlord dispute that had since been satisfied and expunged, but apparently my brother's attorneys had found it. They were going to use it. They were going to stand in a courtroom and tell a judge that I was not capable of managing my own inheritance. I called Gerald Hofstadter that night. He told me the petition had been filed, that it had merit in terms of being technically allowable, and that I would need to respond within 30 days. He offered to represent me for a fee that made me close my eyes and breathe through my nose for several seconds. I thanked him and said I'd be in touch. Then I hung up and I sat on my kitchen floor for about 20 minutes. Then I got up and I opened my laptop. Here's something about me that my family never paid enough attention to know. I am a licensed CPA. I've been certified for 3 years. I was sitting at work, eating a sad run, eating a sad run, eating a sad run, eating a sad rub is reading financial documents closely enough to find the things people are trying to hide. I am very, very good at it. I did not have the money to hire Gerald Hofstadter or anyone like him, but I had 8 months before the conservatorship hearing. 8 months is a long time when you know how to read. I filed my response to the petition myself using the North Carolina Court's self-help resources and a procedural manual I ordered from a legal publisher for $42. I was sitting at work, eating a sad runny ridge. I was sad runny ridge. Now with information. And I had been trained by my grandmother from the age of 12 to never lose a receipt. Then I started digging. The land was in trust, but the trust had documentation. Gerald's office sent me copies of everything when I asked. I went through it line by line. And then, because it was my job, because I couldn't help it, I went through it again. I found something. 3 years before my grandmother died, she had made a loan, $47,000, transferred out of her personal savings account to a joint account that I traced through two transfers in a closed LLC to my brother Nathan. The loan had never been repaid, it had never been documented as forgiven. It existed in her financial records as an outstanding receivable, money owed to her estate that had not been listed anywhere in the probate filings. My brother's attorneys were filing a petition arguing I was financially irresponsible. My brother owed my grandmother's estate $47,000. I was sitting at work eating a sad granola for lunch. The hearing was on a Tuesday in November. The courthouse was a 40-minute drive from my apartment. I left 90 minutes early because I didn't want to be rushed and because I needed the drive to be quiet. I was sitting at work eating a sad bend my desk, eating a sad grenadis that had fit well enough, and a pair of black slacks I'd pressed the night before. I carried a manila accordion folder and a tote bag with two additional folders inside, color-coded and tabbed. I had printed everything 3 times. I had a USB drive with digital copies. I had a timeline document I'd made in Excel that laid out every significant financial event in the relevant accounts going back to the date of the loan. I had rehearsed nothing. I had prepared everything. Nathan was already inside when I arrived. He was with Patrice and my mother, and they were talking to the attorney in the charcoal suit, whose name I'd looked up. Kenneth Ashworth, 14 years in practice, specializing in estate litigation. He'd won some significant cases. My brother had spent real money on him. When Nathan saw me walk in with my folder and my grandmother's blazer, he laughed. I found a seat on my side of the room and I set my folders down and I waited. The judge's name was Honorable Patricia Okafor. She had been on the bench for 11 years. I had looked her up too. Kenneth Ashworth presented first. He was polished and confident. He laid out their case clearly. A young woman with a documented history of financial instability, now suddenly in control of a significant land asset she had no plan for and no experience managing. He mentioned the landlord judgment. He mentioned my student loan balance. He mentioned gently that my grandmother had been ill during the period when she'd updated her will. He did not mention the $47,000. When it was my turn, I stood up. Your Honor, I said, my name is Callie Merritt. I'm appearing pro se today. I'm also a licensed CPA, the state of North Carolina, and I'd like to introduce several documents into evidence if that's all right. The judge looked at me. Just for a moment, something shifted in her expression. Not much, just a small recalibration. Go ahead, Ms. Merritt. I started with the easy part, my financial history. 3 years of bank statements, all accounts. 4 years of on-time rent payments documented through money order receipts I'd kept in a folder in my closet because my grandmother had told me to keep everything. My CPA certification, my employment history, the satisfied judgment along with the court documentation showing it had been expunged, my Roth IRA statements. Then I put the second folder on the table. Your Honor, in the course of reviewing the estate documentation I was provided, I identified an outstanding loan of $47,000 made by my grandmother to my brother Nathan Merritt in March of 3 years ago. I slid the transfer records across. This loan is undocumented in the current probate filings. It was not listed among the estate's receivables. Under North Carolina estate law, it represents an asset of the estate that has not been properly disclosed. The room was very quiet. I'm not here to make accusations, I said. I'm here to demonstrate that I am capable, professionally and personally, of managing a financial asset responsibly. I let the court draw its own conclusions about who in this family has demonstrated financial responsibility. I sat down. Kenneth Ashworth asked for a brief recess. The judge granted 5 minutes. During those 5 minutes, I did not look at my brother. I looked at my hands, which were steady. They'd been steady all morning. I'd been surprised by that, honestly. I'd expected them to shake. When court resumed, Kenneth Ashworth requested a continuance. The judge denied it. She took less than 30 minutes to rule. The conservatorship petition was denied. The trust would remain in my name, managed by Gerald Hofstadter's office as my grandmother had intended. The judge noted in her ruling that the undisclosed receivable would be referred to the probate court for further review. She looked at me when she said it. I didn't say anything to Nathan on the way out. I didn't need to. He and Patrice left quickly, my mother trailing behind them, and I stood on the courthouse steps in my grandmother's blazer with my accordion folder under my arm, and I watched them go. My phone buzzed. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. I drove home the long way, through the part of Charlotte where the trees were still holding their leaves, yellow and rust and a color that doesn't have a name. I stopped at a diner I'd driven past 100 times and never gone into, and I ordered eggs and coffee, and I sat by the window and I let myself feel it. All of it. The months of it. The years of it. The Sunday morning shelling beans on a porch I was now going to have to figure out what to do with. I thought about what my grandmother had said. The person who understands what it means. I think I'm starting to. I went out to the land for the first time in the spring. I hadn't been back since the summer I was 24, when my grandmother had taken me out to walk the fence line after a storm. It looked the same pond, same scrub pines, same barn listing, left like it was tired. I stood at the edge of the property for a long time with my hands in my jacket pockets. The probate court found in favor of the estate on the undisclosed receivable. Nathan has been ordered to repay $47,000 plus interest calculated from the date of the original transfer. I understand the legal process for collecting that debt has begun. I was not involved in initiating it. I simply provided documents that were already part of the record. My mother called 3 more times after the hearing. The 4th time I picked up, she told me I had blindsided the family. I told her I had simply been prepared. She told me that wasn't what family does. I told her I'd learned what family does from watching, and I'd decided to learn something different from Grandma Lorraine instead. She hung up. That was 4 months ago. Nathan sent one text. About 3 weeks after the ruling. It said, "You really did all that?" No question mark. I was sitting at work, eating a sitting at bar for lunch. Went back to the document I'd been working on. The land is still mine. I wired an agricultural consultant to assess what it might be used for. There's interest from a regional conservation organization in a partnership arrangement that would let me preserve most of it while generating some income from the timber rights on the back 10 acres. Gerald Hofstadter says the structure looks sound. I've been keeping copies of everything. My grandmother would have put them in a notebook. I use a shared drive, encrypted, backed up twice. But same idea. You document what matters. You hold on to the proof. You stay steady when the room is expecting you to shake. I kept her blazer. I had it dry cleaned and hung properly. I don't know when I'll wear it again, but I'll know when I'll wear it again. I learned that from her too, knowing when something is worth holding on to and not letting anyone convince you to let it go before you're ready. There's something I keep coming back to when I think about that Tuesday morning in November. Not the ruling, not the moment Kenneth Ashworth asked for a continuance and didn't get it. What I keep coming back to is my grandmother's blazer hanging on the back of my closet door the night before. Navy wool, shoulder pads slightly too wide. I'd pressed my slacks, made coffee, laid everything out, and then I'd just stood there looking at it for a while. She'd worn that blazer to every hard thing she ever had to do. That's what I was thinking. What happened to me, what happened to Nathan, to my mother, to all of us, wasn't random. It was the result of choices made over a long time by people who thought they understood how things would go. My brother assumed I was the same person he'd watched struggle in my late 20s. He took that snapshot and kept it. He never updated it because he never paid close enough attention to notice I had. That's a choice too, even if he didn't know he was making it. My grandmother paid attention. She watched me for 22 years before she put my name on that trust. She didn't do it out of sentiment. She did it because she had seen something. The way I sat with her records, the way I asked questions, the way I didn't walk away from hard information. She was a precise woman. She didn't leave things to chance. I think about integrity a lot now, in a way I didn't used to. Not the word, the actual thing it points to. The alignment between what you know is right and what you do when no one's watching and nothing's guaranteed. My grandmother kept receipts for 20 years of property taxes that no one ever asked to see. She kept them anyway. That's not caution, that's character. That's a way of moving through the world that says what I do matters, even when I'm the only one who knows I did it. The intelligence piece is harder to talk about because people get it wrong. They think it means being the smartest in the room. It doesn't. It means being willing to learn what you don't know yet and then doing the work to learn it. I spent 8 months reading legal procedural manuals and estate law and court filings. I am not a lawyer, but I know how to read and I know how to organize what I find. And I know that the truth, documented carefully, is usually enough if you're patient enough to let it speak. The hardest part was the patience. The 8 months of not saying anything to anyone in my family, the months before that when I'd felt the grief of my grandmother's death and underneath it, like a stone in a current, the grief of understanding what my family had always been. Staying steady through that, staying focused and grounded when every instinct said to collapse or to rage, that was the work, not the folders. The folders were easy. It was the months of quiet that were hard. I don't know exactly what Grandma Lorraine intended when she left me that land. I think she intended more than the acreage. I think she was leaving me a test and a tool and a reminder all at once. A reminder that the only person responsible for your life is you, that preparation is a form of self-respect, and that the people who underestimate you will keep underestimating you right up until the moment you don't need them to stop. The land is still mine. I'm still learning what to do with it. That feels right.